Hi guys, today let's talk about bringing your idea out of your brain and onto the paper. This is something that I think a lot of us struggle with. It is a very tricky step, and I think there's a lot of reasons why that is. So let's just go ahead and paint together and talk about the struggle that a lot of artists deal with. I absolutely struggled with it for this piece specifically, so that's why it's on my brain. I feel like it's one of those things where you can get better and better at it, but there's always going to be setbacks where there's a specific piece or image that you have in your idea, and in that moment, in that situation, it's just much harder to get out onto the paper. But anyways, this piece, when I was coming up with ideas for what to work on, I had almost this like immediate image in my head. I could see it. I could see this character and I could see the colors and these crows flying around her. But because it was in my mind's eye, and I guess there's a bit of a caveat that comes with this, is that we all have a different level of how we see things in our brains, in our mind's eye, how detailed things are, how concrete they are. I bet there's some people who could just think things up and immediately see where everything is positioned and compose things in their mind, but that is not how it works for me. For me, it's a lot more vague, and things are just kind of like moving and shifting when I think about them. So I had this idea, this spark, and it felt like I could see everything. I could see the components and I could feel what I wanted it to look like. But it was such a fight to get it to work on paper. I spent almost an entire day just thumbnailing things out, where I was trying to go down the path that I thought I could see in my head, and then I tried lots of other ones that had different compositions because I just couldn't quite get it down. And that was my big struggle with this piece. Once I finally figured out how what I was actually seeing, what I was imagining, and then finding a way to put it down on paper, it got a lot easier and a lot more enjoyable. I find that a lot of times when this happens to me, where I have an idea that feels stuck in my head, it's because I'm overcomplicating that initial idea. And that initial idea is something that can have sometimes a very small set of parameters that actually makes it what it is. And then as I'm trying to put it down on paper, trying to sketch it out, I'm changing things or adding things, and I find that it's a lot more helpful for me to be able to unlock how to get that first idea down, and then I can start working through different ways of solving those problems. So I like to get that initial thumbnail, initial idea, and then I can do different compositions. Because I find when I don't get that first idea down, it ends up just being this trap where I feel like I can't get something as good as what was in my head, that original spark of an idea, even if it might objectively actually be better. Because it's this elusive idea, I can't move on from it. So I like to take the first step of conquering that and getting that idea down first. Now that leads to the actual challenge of it, and that's doing it. That's getting it down on paper. So what I like to do in that situation is I like to start asking myself questions. So what are some of the key components in that idea that I had? So for that first idea, I knew that I wanted a character, and she would be holding an umbrella. I actually, like I mentioned, had a clear color palette in mind, which it actually is not what ended up for the final, but that didn't really matter because that was part of what I envisioned. That was part of that picture. So being able to catalog that down on my list really did help make it a little bit more concrete. So I wrote that down. I had the crows that were flying around her, and then I started analyzing what was I thinking about as far as composition. What was that thing that I kept kind of moving away from? And that was that I wanted her to be in a profile position with kind of a three quarters of her body showing. So not a portrait, not a full body, but somewhere in between. And that actually ended up being the unlocking moment, was that I hadn't quite nailed down how I wanted her positioned in the piece. And once I figured out that that was a core element to what I wanted, it really helped me to start figuring out, okay, where can I place the crows? How can I use her hair to flow the eye through the piece that I wanted, and then everything started puzzle piecing together. But that really did all come together because I took a minute to start putting down actual tangible lists of each little element. And this almost always unlocks that issue that I have when I am struggling to get an idea down, because when it's in my head, there are, and this is probably something that a lot of us experience, but there's a lot of variables where things haven't been nailed down. You can't clearly see how it's defined. So because it's kind of shifting around and things aren't exactly where they need to be, it enhances the idea in a way that you don't have to be specific yet. So being able to actually say, okay, these components, this and this and this, I want a profile character with some crows flying around her in the same direction, and I want these colors, and the more that you can put that down that are actual real elements, the more you can start to understand what's in your head. And I do have prints available of Ghostly Night. That's the piece that I'm painting today, available at my shop. So there is a link down in the description that'll take you over there. And I also have the original painting available as well. But I loved how this one turned out. I loved working on it. I love the crows. Crows are by far one of my favorite animals. So I'm excited to be able to add this to my shop. Again, that link is down in the description. It'll take you over there so you can check that out. But anyways, let's talk more about ideas and the vagueness of them. But I think that probably is really the main difficulty with transcribing ideas out of your brain onto paper, is because they are so vague, because things are not narrowed down, not only including the fact that there are these images in your head that are just they're not real, they're hard to quantify, but they're kind of like, it makes me think very much of when I do like a sketch or a thumbnail, and it's really loose and lively and it looks really good and the idea is really exciting. But then when I start to work on the more refined drawing of it, it becomes more and more difficult, because all of those things that were just like rough and sketched and energetic but not specific and not refined suddenly need to be refined. It means that I have to start putting in details that weren't there before. So instead of being able to look at a thumbnail or a sketch that's really loose, your brain fills in some of those gaps and it sees what kind of what it could be less than what it is. So as you refine it, you start seeing it more and more as what it is and not what it could be. And those scales start to tip. And I think that's my biggest struggle, is turning that image in my head that's kind of shifting and changing and adapting and looking a lot larger than life, really, than it will once it's on paper, and then finding a way to actually transcribe it. So yeah, your ideas, they don't have to play by the rules of composition, and they don't have to sit within the dimensions of the piece that you're going to create. So a lot of these boundaries that you're going to have to chisel your idea down into aren't present in your brain, so they can feel a lot more exciting and dimensional and special. And then as you have to chip away at that and turn it into something real, it can take away from some of that magic that it seemed like it had. And I think that is, again, I know I always talk about lists. I love lists, but I think that's really where it does help me so much, is that I can look at that and see what are the components that must be there to create the piece that I had in my head. Where if the other things don't quite line up, as long as it has that, it will be that core thing that I was really excited about. So for this painting, I imagined this like almost like flurry of birds around this character, and it didn't quite end up quite as energetic or chaotic as I had in my head, but it's closer to what I imagined than a lot of the thumbnails that I was putting down. So once I quantified that and thought, okay, that was an important component that in a lot of my thumbnails it's just plain missing, that really helped a lot. It helped me turn it into reality. It helped me to start moving in the right path. This is absolutely a skill that I would like to practice more. I'd like to kind of hand in hand practice it more, where I'd like to practice more visualizing the pieces that I'm working on before I start working on them, before I start thumbnailing. And I would also like to practice bringing that out of my brain and turning it into reality. But let's talk a little bit about painting this piece. So I've been trying a little bit of a different technique when it comes to transferring from my sketch onto my final watercolor paper. So in the past, I would usually transfer it very lightly. So I use a light box. So I take the printed out sketch, I put it and tape it underneath my watercolor paper, and then I use a light box and I trace it over basically. But in the past, I would do it very lightly, but also not very sharply, I guess. I would leave little gaps in the pencil, and in the end it didn't really look pretty on its own, which doesn't really matter. It's just the bones of the piece basically. But in one of my last pieces, I tried transferring it almost like I was inking it, where I would draw much darker pencil lines. I would fill things in cleanly and neatly as if they were almost like final art in a way. And I'm much happier with that. It makes me feel a lot more excited about working on the piece, which even if it doesn't change the outcome of the piece, if when I look at it, it feels more enticing and I can't wait to jump into it because it feels like there's more there, more substance to it, then that's a good thing. It's more exciting. But anyways, I did that, which I really enjoyed. It did take me a lot longer to transfer it than it normally does, though, probably at least twice as long, which is not a bad thing in its own right, but it is something that tends to make me get more and more impatient with a piece. So that's something that I need to really rein in and remember to take my time with each step and enjoy each step. That's a problem that I've had for a very long time. I start a step or I start a piece and I feel really excited about it. Say I'm working on the line work for the piece, which I do in watercolors, and it's after I do the main painting. But this happens almost every time. I'll start with the face and I'll do the little sharp, crisp details of her eyelashes and her jawline, and I really enjoy that and I can really pay attention to it. But as the hours tick by and I've been doing line art for all that time and I'm working on less and less important areas of the painting, I get sloppier and sloppier and more rushed. And I do not like doing that anymore. I want to treat each line, each wash as if it's just important as the face or whatever the important concept is in the piece. I want everything to be able to be as clean and precise and correct as possible. And that is a trait of myself that I've been really fighting against. But it has been really helpful once I realized that was something that I kind of fall into as I'm working on my pieces. I get impatient, I get a little bit bored, and I have to recommit to creating beautiful elements throughout the piece for everything and not just get lazy with the less important things. And I've got Ghostly Night, the print, available at my shop. There's a link down in the description that'll take you over there. I love how this one turned out. I'm really excited to be offering it at my shop. It's one of my favorite pieces I've done in the last little while, and I love crows, so this is a piece that's probably going to be one of my favorites for a while. And I do have the original painting available as well. That is looking for a new forever home. That's that same link down in the description that'll take you over to my shop. And as always, I want to give a massive thank you to my patrons over on Patreon. You guys, I can't thank you enough for your support. You help me to make videos and artwork. So thank you. And that's it for today. So I'll be back next time with some more painting, some more artwork, some more art talk, and I'll see you guys then.